Welcome to another episode of my Wake-Up Call. This is the podcast where I find out a little bit about our guests, and I want to find out a lot more about them. And not only what they're doing, but how they came to be doing it. What is it that led them there? Even from their childhood through later in life and some of the wake-up calls. And I'm especially glad to be speaking to Clint Ober, because he's the CEO of Earth FX Incorporated. And he's also hosts research studies at the Earthing Institute. And they have a series of products that allows you to ground yourself to the ground. And I am sitting on one of them as we speak. And I was telling Clint that I think it's elevated my mood a little bit. I feel a little bit lighter, and it's subtle, but I can perceive it. And I look forward to it having even more beneficial effects, because he was kind enough to send me a few products that I'm using, and I would suggest that if you're listening in, that you check him out and check the Earthing Institute. But let me tell you a little bit about him. So EarthFX is a research and development company located in Palm Springs, California. He first learned of grounding when he was installing cable TV systems in Billings, Montana in the early 1960s. Mm-hmm. A decade later, he formed Telecraft Corporation and built it into the largest provider of cable installation services in the United States. And his company specialized in proper grounding of cable installations for safety and TV signal stability. And in the 1980s, he turned his attention to developing the computing industry, and he partnered with McGraw-Hill to distribute the live digital news services via cable to PCs. And it led to the development of the first cable modem and an increased awareness of the need for proper system grounding. He had a health challenge, which he'll tell us about in 1995, and he retired and embarked on a personal journey looking for what his higher purpose in life was. My guess is he said, there's more to my life than installing cable stuff. And he'll tell us about that. And he embarked on a personal journey looking for that higher purpose. During his travels, he noticed people wearing plastic and rubber-soled shoes that insulated their bodies from the earth. He wondered if no longer being naturally grounded could affect us. And that led to an experiment that suggested how grounding alone could reduce chronic pain and improve sleep. And he developed a working hypothesis that earth grounding the human body normalizes functioning of all body systems. And over the past 20 years, he's supported a host of research studies at the Earthing Institute that has demonstrated all these beneficial effects and how it reduces inflammation and promotes normal functioning of all body systems. So, Clint, it's a pleasure to be grounded by you on this podcast. But I will tee up the interview the way I do it with all of my guests, which is, if you were to step back and think about what matters most to your life as you look out at it, what do you think that would be? What calls out to you from the world? And even though I shared a fair amount of your journey, I'd like to get it from the horse's mouth.
Okay. Well, when I was, a child, the first thing I remember ever remembering that stayed with me my whole life was I was out in the field playing with some, and just playing in the field. And I was probably 6 years old, something like that. And I just sat there and I was looking at the grass and a concept went through my mind, how does the grass know to grow? How does the wind know to blow? And so I always was intrigued with. And then I took a stick one time, and I took a little ant that was crawling on the ground, put him on the stick. He would crawl up one end and then down the other. But I was always intrigued with, how does he think? Who is he? What, trying to understand and to grasp this world that I was born into. And I've been on that journey my whole life. By and large, I've been somewhat of a loner because I grew up. My dad died when I was 14,
Mm.
and we had a ranch and you know uh, animals and crops and so I so I grew up fast and but but anyhow, I was always involved with nature, with the animals, with the crops, with the environment, taking care of animals, taking care of this, taking care of that, and forever, and then I oft tell the story that, um, a lot of people, when I was young, I was a cowboy, and a cowboy is not that guy, that the romantic guy on TV. It's a boy sitting on a horse that's riding around the pasture watching the cattle to make sure that they're all healthy and okay. And if one of them doesn't look right, then you take them out of the herd, put them in a holding pen or something, and then ride the herd or ride the pasture area that they're in, and check the grass, make sure it's not too short, make sure there's no noxious weeds starting to grow, make sure the water's okay, and so on, because something in the pasture contributed to the poor health of that animal. And so the concept there is prevention is everything in nature or in animal health. I mean, or animal husbandry, raising crops, anything. It's all about prevention, weeds and toxins, and you name it. So anyhow, I've always had this prevention thing. If one of the kids were to get sick, I'd say, well, what did you do? What did you eat? You did something to make yourself sick, or they could be exposed to a cold or whatever. But in general, if health is, I learned that health is the body's most natural state when I was very young, because in health, it's automatic. Sleep is automatic. Everything is automatic. And if you don't have those things, something is interfering with them. So anyhow, I had that basic thing in me uh, from my growing up. And then I grew up, a lot of my close friends when I was growing up were Native American. And, and it was just so, they taught me a whole different world, or I absorbed it, let's say. And, it's like they're challenged to understand how you can own something. How do you own a tree? How do you own a mountain? How do you own land? It belongs to everybody. It's we're a part of it, and so on. So I have a very different look on things, and I've always stood away from the crowd, not because I didn't want to be involved, but I just didn't fit in because I grew up too fast. I was older than the people my age, and in thinking and so on. So anyhow, I've always just had that intuitive thing in me that's run through my whole life, where if I don't see it in nature, I'm challenged to accept it or believe it. And I try not to believe anything. I try to, if I don't know, I go find out and determine that I either don't know or can't know, or I do know. And so I try to operate on the basis of knowing things, because then you can go forward. Um, but if your beliefs are, they're okay, and I don't hold them against anybody. It's just, there's a big difference between knowing and believing, and I would encourage, but that's another subject. But anyhow, so I just have had this very interest in nature, in whether it's the weather, whether it's the crops, or whether it's the animals, or people, personal health, everything. And and then when I left that environment, when I was maybe in 18, 19, somewhere in there, And I ended up a couple years later in they were just starting to build cable television systems. And this was back in the early 60s. It actually started a little bit before then, but it was in 1960 when the industry started to take hold. And they knew how to build the cable systems, and they knew how to run wire and all those things, but they didn't really understand how to market them and so on. So they hired me because I could spell the word marketing. This was back in the 60s, you know. There's a lot, the world's changed a lot since then. But anyhow, um, so I looked at the cable industry very differently than the people who built it and the people who ended up owning it. I looked at it because here I was in Billings, Montana, you know, a two TV station town, one right, one left. All they did was argue with each other, and you know, a lot of political stuff, and it's just all craziness. And I never did really, you know, I just didn't identify with all of that. And but when cable came along, all of a sudden, then we could import a TV signal from Casper, or Denver, or WGN from Chicago, or WTBS from wherever, Atlanta. And so all of a sudden the world was bigger. Now I could see news from LA or wherever. And the world was bigger than Billings, Montana, and with a little world that I grew up in. So now I could see people everywhere I could. And then as that industry, and that's how I fell in love with the cable television industry, because it was an eye on the world. I mean, it wasn't when we started, it was just more TV, but we all had this vision in our minds that once we understood that you could eventually have 100 channels or 1,000 channels, or today tens of thousands of channels, you know, because of the internet. And so, but the concept was, then that was all broadcasting, meaning that whatever the TV station put out, it was a broadcast to everybody that was listening. And what we were pushing for was narrowcasting, meaning people who had different interests could tune in, and you know, rather than broadcasting, it was more narrowcasting. And I could go on for hours about the development of it. But anyhow, I fell in love with that industry, and I was a part of it from, you know, the early advent of cable. And I went, you know, studied it. I mean, I was involved in the latter, about 30 years, and I was 19. I mean, I was 50 years old when I left or retired from it. But just prior to that, probably 7, 8, 9 years prior to that, the personal computer had began to surface, and I bought them for the kids. We had a Mac, or a Commodore 64, and you know, the toy ones, and then the first Apples. And and I kept, you know, one day I was opening the closet and one fell out, and I looked at it and I said, you know, that's a TV set without a signal. And so I spent, you know, 7, 8, 9 years. We went around the world. We collected, you know, all the data services, all of the newswire services from around the world, and packed them into you know, everything from Shenhua from China to TASS from Russia, everything. And we put it all in a unified data stream, bounced it off a satellite, fed it over a cable system. So if you had an Apple or certain types of computers, we'd give you a little piece of software, and then you could connect it via a modem to the cable, and then you could put in keywords and create your own newspaper. And this was pre-internet. And then the internet came along about that time. And so the world changed, and it's changed, you know, so many times since. But but anyhow, it was just the idea of the concept of satellites and computers, but all this equipment had to be grounded because it was aerial. A lot of it was aerial plant, and it had to be connected to the earth in order to maintain the electrical stability of the system and the electronics in the system, but also to prevent damage from lightning. Because if lightning were to hit an aerial cable, then it could go into the home or homes and blow up a TV or something and start a fire.
So let me ask you, and you are doing a wonderful job of just sharing with us something that my listeners and I can visualize. We can just see your journey. Was there a visceral experience about grounding when you realized all these things needed to be grounded? Was there something that was not just sort of an intellectual engineering concept, but something that you could almost feel viscerally that led you in the direction of kind of what you've been doing in the past number of years?
Um, well, I was a cowboy, so I always wore leather-soled um, shoes, cowboy boots with leather soles. And whenever I would put on a pair of tennis shoes, my feet would start to sweat and they were always hot. So I never did like them. So I tended to wear leather sole shoes most of my life. But anyhow, so I don't recall anything other than just an occasional. I would prefer to wear a leather boot than I would a plastic soled shoe. But I do remember one time when I was a child, and I was over at one of my friend's house. They still lived in teepees back in the early '50s, and the government came in and built them houses, but they still stayed in their teepees. But anyhow, I remember one of the moms. We came home and walked into the teepee, and one of the moms said, "Take your shoes off; they'll make you sick." I wouldn't have had a clue. I
Hmm.
never give it a thought. I just thought it was odd, but we just took our shoes off and whatever, and things like that. And then I remember one time when I was young, there was one of these same families. There was a young girl that was probably 8 or 9 or younger, and she contracted scarlet fever. And she'd been to the doctor. There was not too much they could do back in those days. And so they took her home, and one of the elders dug a little pit in the ground, maybe a foot deep, and put a little straw in it. And then they built a fire not too far away, and put the little girl in there and covered her up with a blanket. And so she was ground level in the earth, kind of. And about 3 or 4 days later, she was up running around like nothing had ever happened. And I thought that was really strange. And but now I've heard that it's indigenous people around the world practice burying their people that are not well in the earth to heal them. And so, but anyhow, I knew none of this at that time. But no, I didn't really know anything other than just incidental things. I feel that in my life, there's something intuitive, something internal, something bigger than me. Then I just was available to walk along and help out because I had retired from the industry when I was 50, and I'd done okay. But when I was 50, I ended up getting an abscess in a tooth, and I went and had it. They put a root canal in, and about a month later, I started getting very, very sick. And they had no idea that there's any relation. So, but anyhow, I finally got into into a emergency care, and they ended up putting me in a CAT scan and finding that I had a huge abscess in my liver. And so it was kind of a shocking event because that next morning the doc came in. He says, "Well, we have good news and we have some bad news. The good news is we found out what it is, that you have an infection in your liver, and it's when they cultured it, it was something related to similar to mouth bacteria, and so anyhow, it had exploded in my liver, and I was turning yellow, hard to stand up, and hard to even keep my eyes focused. And then the bad news was that I was healthy enough, young enough to get a new liver, but I didn't have time. So anyhow, they told me to go home and get my act together and take care of my things because they didn't know what was going to happen. They sent a nurse daily to give me new IVs or antibiotics and so on. But anyhow, so a few days later, a young surgeon from the Swedish Medical Center in Denver called and said, we heard your story and we know we'd like to do some experimental surgery. And so I agreed to it. And I went in and they cut out a significant portion of the right lobe of my liver. In fact, there was very little left, and I had hardly any energy. But anyhow, I did recover after a few days in ICU, but I had no energy at all to speak of. And they eventually sent me home, and it took me a few weeks to even walk back and forth to the bathroom by myself. But the surprising thing was 6 months later, my liver grew back 100% in size, not in the same configuration because it's 6 pockets of little growth there. But the one that was left grew back to the full size to replace the liver. So I had full liver function. So at age 50, I got a new liver essentially. But anyhow, so it was after that event, right after that event, I was laying in bed one day or one morning, and I had collected art. I had a huge Western art collection from fine arts, and I ended up living in a 5,000 square foot 2-bedroom home on top of Stanley Mountain in Evergreen, Colorado. It was like a ski lodge, and but it was for the art and stuff. But anyhow, but when one morning I woke up and I looked out the window and everything was more vibrant. The pine needles were more green and vibrating. The sky was more blue, just energetically. And I didn't know what to think, but I started to feel different. And then all of a sudden I asked myself, what would have happened to all my art? What would have happened to all the things that I had spent my life collecting had I died? And I didn't know it yet, but it just sent a cold chill through me because I knew the kids would have taken a few pieces and the rest of it, nobody would have known, nobody would have cared. And so anyhow, I very shortly just had this epiphany that I never owned any of this stuff, that I bought it, found it, collected, took it home, and spent my life taking care of it. It gets to stay, and I have to go. But anyhow, so that I instantly developed an aversion to owning anything. I didn't want to own anything. I wanted to let go of everything, and I just wanted freedom. I didn't want to be thinking about this or that or whatever. And so I did over a couple of months, had my kids come take everything they wanted, and I ended up selling the home, everything, and all I had left was I bought a small RV and I had 2.5 suitcases of clothes, put them in the bus, and I took off and I started traveling. I traveled around the United States for 4 years, and most of the time in national parks or visiting friends and family from around the country, and and so that eventually I reconnected with nature, reconnected with my roots. And I knew I never wanted to go back into the business world. And so 4 years later, I was down in Key Largo on the Bayside and watching the sunset one night, which was always beautiful. And I had this visceral feeling, if you want to say that, come over me. And it was like I needed to go do something, rather than just go live and play with people on the weekends in RV parks or state parks. And so anyhow, but I went inside and I wrote on a tablet, it says become an opposite charge. I didn't know what it meant, other normally that would mean to me, go poke them, stir them up, get them excited, charge them up. and then a few minutes later, I had a second thought was status quo is the enemy. And I didn't know what, but I wrote them both down on a yellow piece of paper and threw it. And then a few days later, I decided to pack up and I headed back to California. Got there, didn't like it, so I ended up going over to Arizona and trying to make my way up to Flagstaff, which is kind of like Montana, where I'm from, kind of the cold and the snow and the pine. And and halfway up, it was getting late. And I saw a little RV sign pointing to Sedona, Arizona. Never heard of it, never been there. And so I went up there and said, I'll stay there the night and go up in the morning. And I woke up in the morning and looked out the door and I said, I'm not leaving here. This is like living in a national park. So so I ended up staying there for 2 years. But during that 2 years, I needed to entertain myself. In that town, they had they have, dozens of art galleries, and I love art. I didn't want to buy anything, didn't want to own it, but I still loved art, so I would spend a lot of time there. And one day they were having an event, an exhibit of a very famous artist that I knew, and come to town. And so I went to the owner and I said, please let me, I have a background in stage lighting when I was a kid. I said, please let me come in and help you light your gallery. Because she had like 200 pieces of art and so many lights, you had to have a baseball cap in order to see the art. And so I said, I know the artist, and I would, anyhow, it took me a couple of weeks, but I talked her into letting me redo her gallery. So I went in, took all the lights down, took all the art out. It was a big, dark gallery. And then they started bringing in a dozen pieces. And then I spaced them all out, and then we lit them one at a time. So each one of them had presence, and so you could feel the art. You could feel what the artist was trying to present. And so anyhow, as a result, a lot of the other art gallery owners were at that event, and they all said, who did your lighting? And then all of a sudden I had an instant little business called Best of Show. No money, just a hobby business. And it turned out to be pretty good. I ended up selling it and leaving. But anyhow, while I was doing that, one day I was sitting at my computer, and it kept glitch every time I trying to put in an order or something. The computer would glitch, and then I'd have to shut it down, bring it back up, and try to put in my order. And then finally, I realized it was static electricity. So I took a piece of metal copper tape, put it across my desk, connected it to an alligator wire, and connected it to a ground. And then I would, before I would touch my computer, I would touch the tape and ground the static electricity off my body. Then I could go type, and my computer worked perfectly. And so about an hour after that, I went outdoors, and I was sitting on a bench across from Tlaquepaque, which is a tourist area there. And this bus pulled up, and out came a parade of, they were Japanese tours, a tour group from Japan. And they all had, they were kind of shorter, but they had the big white Nike type tennis shoes on. And it looked like they had all been to a strip mall that had them on sale because they were all wearing them, but it was just so obvious. But that's where I got, where the question popped into my mind, that I wonder if there's a consequence to humans no longer being naturally grounded. When I was a kid, we were always grounded. We were barefoot or we wore leather. And didn't think too much about it, didn't really know, but went home that night, grabbed some meters, went out, started checking the environmental electric fields that are on your body when in the static electricity that are on your body when you're in a home and not grounded. And because your body is an antenna when you're not grounded. And so anyhow, I started measuring all these crazy voltages and charges on my body. And the worst was in my bedroom. And so it was late at night, but the hardware store was still open. So I ran down there, grabbed a roll of 3-inch wide metal duct tape, taped it across my bed. It was aluminum duct tape, and connected it to a wire, threw it out the window, grounded it to the earth, took the meter that I was measuring with, and it was already grounded to the earth. And then I would lay down on the tape, and I would touch the test probe on the meter, and it would read 0. As soon as I unplugged the tape, then all the voltages came back. So I said, wow, there's something going on here. But the next thing I knew, it was morning. And the meter was down by my side. I was 54 years old. I was a cowboy. I'd skied for 30 years. I've had every injury you can possibly imagine. And but anyhow, my body was full of pain, chronic pain. Living on Advil occasionally. If it was really bad, I had to get pain meds. And so anyhow, the next morning I woke up and I said, there's something going on, because no, I don't sleep. And so the next night I did it again, and then I did it another night, and then the same kind of effect. And then I invited a couple of friends that I'd met. I said, hey, you guys got to try this, because nobody sleeps at night and everybody's got pain, And so I grounded them, and a couple of days later they came back, but one of them came back and he said, do you think this could be affecting my arthritis? And I says, no, I think it's just grounds this stuff out, and then so it affects it just improves your sleep. And he said, but my arthritis is way down. Then I realized that all of my pain, chronic pain, had started to significantly reduced. And then it was like, oh, how come I don't know about this? How come no one told me about this? Why doesn't anyone know about this? And that's when the light bulb went off, and I said, okay, this is real, and I've got to do something with this. And then I went on a journey down to the University of Arizona in Tucson, ended up, LA at the, I remember, and I was out there, and I went out there because I figured no one knew anything about grounding or why grounding affected the body or why it reduced pain. And so when I went to UCLA, the only people I could connect with was the sleep lab, and I told them what I was doing, and they said, "You expect us to believe that somebody's going to put a nail in the ground, tie a wire around the nail in somebody's toe, and they're going to sleep better?" They said, "Get out of here! You're nuts." And we joked around a little bit, and I learned real quick. They knew nothing about electrical, and I knew nothing about biology. So it was like everybody's talking Greek. But anyhow, I was able to connect with a couple of students, and they taught me how to do a study. I wanted them to do it. They wouldn't do it. They said it would take 5 years, could cost $5 million, and may not get published. And I said, that's not a very good idea to do. But that's really the way it works, and I understand. But now I understand. I didn't know. But so anyhow, I ended up getting, doing our own study, or promoting our own study. Hired a nurse to help with it. We ended up getting 60 subjects. 30 of them were grounded for 6-8 weeks, and 30 of them were placebo ground. And what we found out was everybody who slept grounded, they slept better, and their general health felt better. They had less pain, less anxiety, irritability, and depression. Okay, so I thought that was interesting, but I could go on for hours, and we don't have that much time. But of the discoveries that we made within discoveries, because it was just forever, every day we were learning something new. Ultimately, with that study, we learned that it wasn't the electric fields that was causing the results. It wasn't reducing the pain. It wasn't. It was what you're doing is when you connect to the earth, then the earth has what we call a negative charge, meaning an abundance of free electrons that are able to rapidly move and reduce charge, like lightning, like static electricity. If you get static charge on your body and you touch ground or touch anything, metal, you'll feel a shock. Well, that's, you're grounding that static charge on your body. And what you're doing is but the earth is an electron donor, meaning it will give up electrons. When you're standing barefoot on the earth, then your skin is conductive, your body is conductive, everything in the body is electrical first, chemical second. That's, but anyhow, I just looked at everything from an electrical. So we ended up doing, I think now we have 30, 40 peer-reviewed published studies, papers, and studies, and dozens of review articles and so on. But anyhow, so it's been, I figured it would take a couple of weeks in LA to figure this out, and it's been, almost 25 years later. But it's one of those things that once you see what it does, or know what it does, learn what it does, it took us 8 years to figure out the mechanism of action, what really is going on. Why does grounding reduce inflammation or pain? Because first of all, it wasn't until 2004 that we even heard the word inflammation. That was only 20 years ago. And so it was, oxidative stress and so on. But anyhow, so we ended up, after doing a few of our studies, that one day I was going through some files and I was trying to understand how the immune system worked. And I realized when I came across neutrophils, how a neutrophil, if you have a pathogen in your body, a neutrophil will swim over and it'll wrap itself around, it's kind of a jelly type cell, wrap itself around the pathogen, and then it releases what we call reactive oxygen species. And as soon as I heard the word reactive, I said, wait, this is electrical. So then I started going down that rabbit hole, saying, okay, this is an electrical phenomena, and Earth is negative, meaning it can donate free electrons. So the more I got into it, I realized eventually, and again, a lot of cowboy logic here, or intuition, or somebody else guiding this, because I wasn't smart enough to figure this out. It just came through me, or to me and through me. And I was just freed. I didn't have anything else to do in life except focus on this, and I loved every minute of it. But so what we ended up discovering was, and again, I say cowboy logic, it's if you have a fire in the body, if you have excess radicals left over from an oxidative burst, and you don't have enough redox potential or enough free electrons to reduce those excess radicals, then the remaining radical is going to steal an electron from a healthy cell, damage it. Another message goes out to the immune system. Another neutrophil comes over to clean up that mess. And then again, so it sets up a chain reaction. And when it becomes chronic, then it becomes what we call inflammation. The body is on fire. The oxidative burst is not inflammation. And that's the big thing that most people miss. Oxidative burst is inflammatory, but it's not meant to harm the body. And when we lost our ground in 1960, we started wearing rubber-soled shoes, these synthetic soled shoes, so everybody could afford them. And ever since then, the rise of inflammation-related health disorders has been exponential, and it's still growing. And nobody knew. This is only 60 years ago, and I started this work 20 years ago. So this is all in the modern stuff, like everything else in medicine. It's all modern. It's all new. We're just figuring it out, and nobody knows, the whole thing. It's putting pieces together. And but anyhow, so we tied it back to, I think back in 1960, the 90% of the visits to a general practitioner were for infectious disease, acute injury, and childbirth. And today, 90% of the health visits to a practitioner are for any inflammation-related health disorder, meaning the immune system is malfunctioning, dysfunctioning, and it's manifesting all of these host of modern health disorders that we all have names. But like Ritger and the boys from Boston, Mass, when they published their first study on inflammation, they said you don't have cancer, you don't have cardiovascular, you don't have all these health disorders. What you have is chronic inflammation. And it manifests differently in different people based on their genetics and their lifestyle, their living lifestyle, their habits, and so on. And so that's how it all kind of unfolded. And so it was a eureka moment, figuring all these things out. The problem was, and you mentioned Steve Jobs a lot in your work, and Steve, I knew Steve because I was with him and was in the garage when they were pasting some of those boards together. And I'm 79 now. It's crazy where it all went. But anyhow, I recognized that we had just made a major discovery, which was the eureka thing. But the challenge was nobody knew about it. And so you had to educate every person one-on-one, and you had to let them to experience it. Nobody was going to believe it. But if you were to take someone and put an electrode patch in the palm of their hand, connect it to a ground, and especially an MS girl, and their pain would stop, and their circulation would improve, the respiration changes, all in 15, 20 minutes, then they would believe it. They didn't care about the science. They just wanted it. They had to have it. And then they, and it goes on and on. But anyhow, so I'm sorry that I'm running on here, but I hope that I'm making sense of this for your listeners.
No, it's been a real education. You've done an amazing job, and uh, and I can understand the inflammation, and I'm reminded of when I was a child, and I would walk on a rug, and I would kind of like to get the shock when I would touch something metal,
Right.
and I can imagine that if that's going on in the body, that it gets discharged when I touch something metal. That if that's running around inside me, uh, it's probably not all that healthy, especially if there's a way to discharge it as opposed to it
Yeah.
running around in your body.
Yeah. Well, the real issue that's taking place here is more related to we evolved grounded. The first amoeba was grounded. All life, all plants, everything was connected to the earth electrically. But we didn't have shoes. We weren't insulated from the earth. And as we, created our modern cultures, modern societies, then we started living above the earth in wood frame homes. And then we started wearing shoes, rubber sole shoes. And so we lost our ground. But before then, you couldn't ever have inflammation in a human body because the corollary is like the in the animal world. Animals don't manifest the modern health disorders that humans do. However, domesticated animals that live in the home with their owners, they manifest similar health disorders to their owners. And 50% of them die from cancer, just like their owners. So it's an environmental shift that we made. We disconnected from the environment. We disconnected from nature. And now we're like astronauts living above the earth. And we're not singing with the earth. We're not functioning, with the normal mechanisms of nature. And our body is part of nature. We come from the earth. We eat the earth. We breathe the earth. We live the earth, and we go back to the earth. And so, but anyhow, we've isolated ourselves from it, and because of that, our immune systems are no longer grounded, and now we have autoimmune disorder, meaning the immune system is dysfunctioning because it doesn't have enough free electrons in the body to reduce the remaining radicals from an oxidative burst. It's very, very simple. That's cowboy logic. Now the science and the researchers, and we have plenty of them, they all have lots of other language, but it's really quite simple.
So talk more about the challenge of introducing this to Western medicine, to people who know little to nothing of this and find it easier to dismiss it than to understand it.
Well, I think over the years now, we have, lots of people in the medical world that are suggesting it, recommending it. But it's I have to tell a short little story here that kind of will help explain that. I have a group of cardiologists down in Southern California that they've been using some of our products for 20 years almost, or 16 years at least. And they would call up and they would order a dozen different products at a time. These, in the very early days, it was because we grounded the Tour de France riders, and some of them found out about it, and so they ended up. But they would order these grounding products, and they would use them personally. And but anyhow, so they ordered them one day, and I said, "Well, I'm on my way to San Diego. I'd like to stop and see you guys and just meet you and see," because they were early adopters and so on. And I got in there and I met the guy who ordered them, and I asked him, I says, "What do you do with these? What do you do with these mats?" He says, "Well, we use them to keep everybody off the hypertension meds." And I said, "Well, that's great." And I kind of understood that from some of our studies, but anyhow, I said, "Well, why don't you give it to the patients?" He said, "Well, first of all, it's not approved by the AMA and all that kind of stuff. Second of all, there's a huge educational component here." And he says, third of all, he says, when somebody walks through that door, and he pointed over the door, he says, "They're worth about 10 grand to us because We have to run tests. We have to do this. And if I don't get them on script, they're going to go to somebody else. And he said, look around. I've got all this staff. I've got this building where we got docs in here are married to women who are married to doctors, and it went on and on. But we've created a trap. We're all in a trap, meaning it's you can't, I mean, like he said, you can't tell people to go home and get well for free. What are we going to do? How are we going to pay for our education? How are we going to do all this? And it's no different than a car dealer or some grocery store, anything else. We're all in the same boat here. We've created this crazy world that we have. So now you're not going to change it. It is what it is, but you have to fix it. So the opportunity here is not to put anything down, play anything down, is, okay, how can we incorporate the next generation? It's going to take 20, 40 years to integrate new shoes that have carbon in them, or carpets that have a little bit of carbon that ground them, or bedding, and any kind of an environment where you sit, sleep, or walk. You need to be grounded because it's what maintains your immune system electrically stable. So it's 60 years ago, we got enamored with the lights and the color TV and the screens and the cell phones and the computers and data, and it's all wonderful, and it's created a wonderful world for us. But it's a double-edged sword. Now we got to go.
Yeah, and I understand that. So this is sort of a conversation, but it hasn't been a conversation, and I'll share something with you. Which may be parallel. Along with a couple of my team members, we developed an approach to improving culture in big organizations and big companies.
Yep.
That you could do internally and very simply, but the problem is, a lot of these big companies will pay hundreds of thousands of dollars to big consulting companies who bring in all the research about how do you improve a culture.
Right.
And here's what we discovered. It was very simple. A company in which all the employees wake up in the morning and say, "I can't wait to go to work," has a good culture.
Mm-hmm.
And a company where employees wake up and say, "I can't stand my job, I'm trapped," they have a bad culture. So all you have to do is simply reach out to your employees and say, "We want all of you to wake up and say, I can't wait to go to work. So what do we need to do? What do we need to change?" And we'll check in with you to make sure we change that. And plus, we'll attract great talent, because when you're talking to your friends and they say, "What's your company like? What's your job like?" And you say, "I can't wait to go to work." If they don't feel that way, they're going to ask you, "Are you hiring?" So we're going to attract great talent, and it's very simply to implement. But people would say, "Well, yeah, but we're working with some of the big consulting firms, and and we have these contracts, and we do all these surveys, well, what's the track record in changing culture? Not very good."
No.
But it's one of those things that's hidden in plain sight.
Yes.
But there's a whole system that is rewarding complexity as opposed to something that is just right there to be used.
Right. No, it has to. It's like I go back and look at in my life what's come along. Radio, television, telephone, cable, satellites, all these things. It takes every 20 years or 40 years, there's innovation that comes along that eventually has to be incorporated into everyone's lifestyle. And it's like today we have all of this new AI and all that kind of stuff. A lot of people are against it. I'm the opposite. I think it's a great contribution if used properly. How people are going to use it, I don't know, but it's absolutely essential because we have 8 billion people out there now. We have to find ways to take care of people. But anyhow, the main thing is grounding, or this is health related. Health is the next big thing because everybody's sick and it's too costly. So we have to find ways to maintain and sustain health. and prevent health disorder. And grounding is foundational. It's like sunlight, it's there. You have to have it. Um, but we didn't know that, and we're just now learning it. And all I'm doing is digging it out of the dirt. We have, probably 10 million women around the world that are using the products, but we don't market to them. That's all word of mouth. And it's 99% of our customers are moms taking care of their moms and, trying to take care of their kids. And so it's that kind of a business. So I didn't intend that business. I really was involved in the research. I wanted to ferret it out, but the business automatically took off, because it works. And the moms, they don't really care as much about the science. They care that it works. They sleep better, they feel better, they get rid of their inflammation. It helps with chronic, degenerative health disorders and so on, and so on. But they don't need the big explanation. They just need to feel it and know that it works. And then they share it. The average woman who gets grounded will ground 10 or 12 other women within a year. and so so that's the groundswell. But eventually, what's going to bring this in and make this work, like any business, there has to be money. It has to create business. It has to create new business, new money, new jobs. And so it's going to take 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, maybe even 60 years to ground or create conductive environments that we work in, sleep in, and live in, because it's essential. It's like oxygen in the air. If you don't have it, your body's on fire. And so, but anyhow, so it has to be converted to money and careers and feed people. And that's what has to go on next. I'll be 80 next year, and my time is pretty well spent. I'll be a coach, but that's all. I'm not going to be able to do what I've done the last 50 years. So, but
you bring up a good point, because it's because as I'm thinking about skepticism, cynicism about anything that seems disruptive or innovative, and I think you speak the truth, is that that people resist something until they can find a way to somehow turn it into money, or money can be made from it, so that
exactly. Mm-hmm.
So that all the money that is currently being spent on other methods or approaches,
yes,
don't get lost. And
it takes 40 years for that to happen, for that transition to take place. And I've watched it all through the communications industry and entertainment industry for my whole life. It's just a slow rolling train. Sometimes it looks like a train wreck, but every time it always comes out better, bigger and better than it was. And it takes the next generation. It's always about bringing the next generation along and encouraging them to pay their dues and get in there and change the world. Not necessarily change the world, but make the world a good, safe, clean place to live.
Oh yeah, look, I'm a contemporary of yours. I'm a little younger, 75, and I know when I see my doctors and and healthcare, because of Epic and all the big computerized data systems. Boy, when I think of some of my older doctors who have retired and they took notes as opposed to typing in data, I was speaking to my wife and I'm saying, boy, what did they miss? Whereas now when I'm seeing some of my current doctors who are in their late 30s, and they're typing faster than I can think. But then you go on the portal, you see the results, you see you can reach them, and it's just and I have a deep affection for my former doctors, but I'm just thinking, wow, I just feel so much better taken care of.
Exactly.
I mean, you're absolutely right. So where can people find out more about you and what you're doing and your products? And again, if you're listening in, I will recommend them. I'm sitting on one of them right now, and I can feel that it's. I didn't know it was my inflammation that was affecting my mood, but my mood's better, and maybe it's because I was walking around on fire and I didn't know it.
Well, it's definitely related. It's the fight or flight system, sympathetic nervous system. We're all living in a chronically sympathetic state now because our bodies are full of cortisol because we don't ground out the inflammation, and it's just continuous. But anyhow, no, if you're interested in earthing, then the best thing to do is go outdoors, spend 30 minutes with your bare feet on the earth, sit on a chair, read a book, whatever. But just put your bare feet on the earth and then notice your respiration, the color, your skin color, your pain. You just notice how your body shifts and changes, and how the stress kind of bleeds away and you're grounding out the stress. And it's like it's hard to be unhappy and sad or anything when you're grounded to the earth, especially if you have a little bit of sunshine coming through the leaves. It's just a whole different experience. And because what it does is it reduces the stress on the body, takes the charge off the body, the environmental electric charges, takes the stress and grounds the inflammation, and then your body can manage, clean up where the inflammation was, and then go back to maintaining health, which is what it's always done for millions and millions of years. And but anyhow, so I would recommend do your own little research first. Then you can go to earthing.com and you can find out information about some of these grounding pads and planes. But the Earthing Institute.net has all the research that we've done for the last 25 years. You can get any question answered there, any research, and so on. And then the movie, of course, the Earthing movie. There's a version. It's on all various platforms, but it's free on YouTube with no commercials. So just go to YouTube and look for the Earthing movie. You'll enjoy it, and you'll probably learn as much there as you can anywhere. It's very authentic, and it's just eye-opening. And it's free. Earthing is free. Health is free. We just have to remove the things that are interfering with health, or add back in the things that the body needs in order to maintain health.
Yeah. There's a quote that I sometimes share with audiences, and I'll say, a skeptic is someone who is reluctant to believe. Mm-hmm. A cynic is someone who refuses to believe.
Yep.
A skeptic is someone who once believed and was disappointed. A cynic is someone who once believed and was deceived.
Uh-huh.
But deep inside all skeptics and most cynics is a deep hunger to believe again, but to be able to do it with the assurance that they won't be disappointed or deceived again.
Uh-huh. Interesting.
So I don't know if you could track with that, but there's a hunger in people, I believe, mm-hmm. to trust.
Yes.
To love. To feel warmly towards their fellow human being. We just need to find a way to free it so they can experience between them and take away animosity, divisiveness, and loneliness.
Yeah. Yeah. I highly recommend nature as one of the solutions.
I think you're absolutely right. So, well, thank you, Clint. You've been a real revelation and inspiration and education. And to our listeners, please check out Clint and the earthing.com, the Earthing movie. And I think this is an episode that's worth listening to again and sharing it with other people because Clint really gave a wonderful explanation that could help you to really believe how and why being grounded works and can reduce your inflammation. And if your body is on fire, how it can put out that fire so you can live healthier and longer. So thank you.
Amen. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
Well, you've been terrific. And to our listeners, thank you for listening in, and thank you for supporting the podcast. And we appreciate it when you share it and give us comments so we can do an even better job, and so that we can be in sync with your needs, so that we don't develop static between you and our listeners and us. So Everybody take care.
episode of My Wake Up Call with Dr. Mark Goulston was produced by Mark Goulston, Matthew Garver, Robert Doc Barham, and Todd Douglas Music.